Well, let me move quickly on to my next segment in the show tonight because I want to give good eartime to my good friend from Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. Umar Abdullah. And Umar, I welcome you again to the Marcia Wheat Show this first Friday of July. And it's a joy to have you joining us. Last time you were with us, we were discussing the matter of COVID-19 vaccines, getting a little feedback from somewhere on your mic, somewhere back there, just to let you know. And you might
Anyway,
have
it's
been
a pleasure.
unaware.
Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me clearly?
Oh yes, hearing you loud
Right.
and clear.
It's a pleasure. It's
Loud
a
and
pleasure
clear.
to be here. Pleasant good evening to all your
Great to
listeners,
have you.
viewers, locally, regionally, and abroad as well. I know your program has gained a lot of prominence, especially amongst those persons who are doing real thinking and who really really critical of the powers that be, throughout the region and outside of the region as well. Um, so how have you been?
I've been doing pretty well, Umar. Thank you for asking. Really appreciate that. I know this evening you're going to be sharing with us on the whole aspect of vaccine injury throughout the Caribbean because people need to realize it's not just in Barbados, which incidentally, I'm sure you've heard of the first case that the government is being charged with here for vaccine adverse injuries, but also the government's responses through the Caribbean and the international developments and what lessons uh, are in all of this for Barbados. So I'm going to leave, get out of the way and just let you go and share with us all that you need to for this evening.
Right. So again, thank you for having me, and let's see how I can do justice to this particular issue. The thing about it is that within recent times, we have been hearing and we have been reading a lot about these injuries that is occurring as a result of persons receiving the jobs. Now, what is very very interesting though, it's an interview, wasn't an interview, was an address that the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago had given to her supporters back in 2024, September of 2024,
Yes, yes.
when when they won the election campaign. All right, this was before she went into to government, and she was very very critical. And I will get to that later on in the program. She was very very critical of the then government or the then administration, with the way they would have approached the COVID, and she spoke a lot about some of the the jobs that they would have used and their preferences and so on, and a number of things that she said. But like I said, I'm going to get into that after I go through in some detail what has been happening locally and regionally, and in South America and North America as well. Now, across the Caribbean, South America, North America, as I said, lawsuits over alleged COVID-19 vaccine injury have been filed, and we know this for a fact. But most of them remain unresolved until this, up until this time. They because they face major legal obstacles, some of them, due to government's liability shields. All right, so there are a lot of these different impediments in the way with respect to people getting their way in court as it relates to addressing these issues of vaccine injury and so on. In Barbados and Trinidad, as we know, individual cases are in court presently, and we don't want to talk too much about it because we know how that goes. While in the US and Canada, compensation programs do exist, but they criticized as being very slow and inadequate. South America largely relies on civil law systems and compensation funds rather than direct lawsuits. All right, so there are different systems that the public and persons who have been affected by these injections have to face in different, depending on the region or where you're from, your jurisdiction. Um, in Barbados, we know 2024, between 2024 and 2026, a woman um, sued the government alleged alleged blood clotting and vasculitis after AstraZeneca doses that she received in 2021. The claim, I think, was filed under the Consumer Protection Act. I stand to be corrected, arguing the vaccine was defective. She's seeking damages for pain, suffering, loss of earnings, and negligence in failing to support vaccine injured citizens. And of course, that case is ongoing. Um, in Trinidad and Tobago, 2025, a lawsuit was filed after the death of Alicia Cibaran Francis, age 27. She was diagnosed with vaccine induced transverse myelitis following the Pfizer vaccination. Now, there were other individuals as well who had a similar situation as hers, and that's one of our sisters by the name of Felicia, and she would have had a similar circumstances happening to her. She was wheelchair ridden for a very long time. She was, had difficulty in mobility. She had cognitive difficulties as well. And she practically had to start from scratch and learning a lot of things all over again. And she's still going through that process. Thank Almighty God, she's still alive. But the hardship and the challenges and the trauma that she and her family had gone through has been horrendous. There was another young man by the name of Kiel. I think he's of Spanish origin. He would have taken the job here as well, and he would have suffered, heart issues as a result of these injections. Now, why I'm particularly mentioning these three cases, one of our trade union leaders, Anisat, he would have come forward and he would have raised this issue live. It was carried over television, TV6 and other media and so on. They would have wrote about it and reported out on it and so on. So these three cases were very much in the public domain, as it relates to vaccine injury. As you all know, Miss Cibaran went on and she passed away. And now that matter is before the court. The husband is suing the government for negligence and so on in that matter.
Wow.
Now,
Wow.
the thing about it is that now the claim that Cibaran has filed, it alleges a breach of obviously constitutional rights, lack of informed consent. And as we know, informed consent is very important when you are about to receive a medical intervention, or if a medical intervention is being applied to someone, a child whom a parent is responsible for, etc., etc. Informed consent. And what is very, very quickly, what informed consent is that the medical practitioner has to inform the patient or the parent, if there's a child involved, of the adverse effects of this particular, medical intervention, whatever it is. And not just that, but also advise the parents on if there is an alternative to that particular drug or that particular intervention, and the side effects and the effects of that other alternative intervention as well. And if the person decides at the end of hearing all of that if they decide to continue with the intervention, they will go ahead and accept, or they could reject it. They could say no outright. The parent could say, no, I don't want my child receiving that intervention, or I don't want to be part of this. I would try to use some herbal medicine, or as the case may be. That's your right as a patient, all right? And that was never the option during the COVID. That was never the option that was given to no one. No one was ever told the side effects of these jabs, right? And we all know sometime after where the document, that Pfizer document was released, all the side effects of those jabs and what could possibly happen to, and this also included deaths, and it included other adverse, reactions to pregnant women, etc., etc. And that list is there. It's available for whosoever wants to view it, etc., etc. All right. So constitutional rights, lack of informed consent, and negligence under the Food and Drug Act. Um, Now, recently in Trinidad and Tobago, we had a commission of inquiry into the operations of the Food and Drug Department, the division, which would have been, selectively allowing certain drugs to enter the country without scrutiny, and also selectively preventing persons from bringing in other types of drugs and supplements in Trinidad and Tobago. And this has come under heavy scrutiny, this commission of inquiry that's taking place presently. I think it was concluded, I can't remember, but there was a lot of issues raised and questions and so on and so forth. So from the onset, we can see that the Food and Drug Division here in Trinidad and Tobago was culpable and complicit, right, in all of these issues that was taking place as regards to those drugs, because you had a responsibility to put have checks and balances in place to ensure that these drugs or these interventions were safe, because the government did say that it's safe. You can take it, and you have to take it in some cases in order to hold on to your job. And if not, in Trinidad and Tobago, we had an issue where the government wanted to fire people and not pay them their salaries if they were not taking the jobs, etc., etc. All right. So proceedings were initiated against the Minister of Health and the NCH and the NCRHA, and that case is also pending before our courts. Now, the general trend in South America, the South American countries, operate under civil law systems, as I said, which with compensation funds rather than direct lawsuits. All right. So if you want compensation in the South American countries, there is a civil suit that you can apply to the courts in order to get compensation. All right. So that's the same in Trinidad and Tobago, and I'm not too sure it's done in Barbados, but in Trinidad and Tobago, if it is you have a some redress as regards a particular issue with a company, with an individual, you can file civil lawsuits in the courts where you can get compensation, and you can sue that individual, etc., etc. Legal protections for healthcare workers and governments also limit liability in this particular case. And the compensation funds exist in countries like Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, but payouts are very rare and require strong medical evidence. Of course, you'll have to provide all the necessary evidence and arguments and scenarios and so on in order for you to be successful in accessing that compensation. You just can't go and say, well, okay, I got this job in 2021, and I'm feeling extremely sick and fatigued and so on and so forth, and I'm suffering with this, that, and the other, and expect that you're going to, okay, come into the office, we give you a check, and we tell us what it's costing you in medical expenses, etc. It's not going to happen that easily. You're going to have to actually prove. You have to provide medical records, and you're going to have to connect the dots, and connect the dots and so on, so that you'll be able to prove your case. In North America, however, in the United States, there has been direct lawsuits against the manufacturers, and the most of these lawsuits have been blocked by something called the PrEP Act. All right, you can look it up, PREP Act, which grants broad immunity for some of these pharmaceutical companies and so on. Injured individuals must file under the Countermeasures Injury Compensation Program, which is CICP. Over 11,000 claims have been filed thus far, but fewer than 1,000 has been resolved. Only a small fraction was paid. Compensation also limited to medical costs, loss of income. Maximum I think they're giving out is about $50,000 per year. Death benefits, they also you can probably access that as well. You're not getting no damages for pain and suffering. So this is how unique these cases are resolved or are being considered in a lot of our different jurisdictions right around us. Um, Lawsuits are emerging challenging the constitutionality of the CICP, arguing it denies due process and jury trials. In Canada, however, um, Canada had established and very early a vaccine injury support program, which is the VISP in 2021. This provided compensation for serious injuries or deaths linked to COVID-19 vaccines. As of 2025, hundreds of claims have been filed. Payouts remain again very limited and very, very slow. So we can conclude from all of this, in the Caribbean, individual lawsuits are testing the government liability and cases are ongoing. So we're very, 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 brave in the Caribbean, and we're leading the charge with regards to this challenging the government, liability in all of this. South America, compensation funds exist, but lawsuits are very rare due to civil law protections. North America, broad immunity laws block most lawsuits. Compensation programs are criticized for being very inadequate. And globally, we can see governments are shielding themselves legally, leaving the injured individuals struggling for remedies. All right. And this is something that, we have to pay particular attention to. And we have to, as a people, as bodies that are stakeholders in all of this, like myself and like yourself as well, who continue to bring or highlight these issues. We have to continue doing a lot of research, bringing a lot of information forward, and sharing that information so that people will be emboldened and encouraged, and also we'll be able to, influence people in stepping up and coming forward with their cases, all right, and challenging the system. Because if we don't do that, eventually what's going to happen is that they are going to create a robust system to such an extent that at some point in time we may not be able to even challenge it or even bring a case forward, because things would have been changed so drastically and so on. Like I said, I want to touch very briefly on that uh, address that the our present prime minister had given when she was in opposition. And what was very interesting about that address was that she spoke about the AstraZeneca, the Johnson Johnson, how those jobs have been rejected in certain other jurisdictions and so on. They were, these jobs did not go through the proper clinical trials, etc., etc., and they were pushed onto the people, and it was not properly vetted, etc., etc. So she alluded to the fact that these were very, very dangerous. It was a very, very dangerous precedent that was set during that time. She also indicated that she would have spoken to Dr. Budo at the time, and he is, interestingly, presently he's the Minister of Health in Trinidad and Tobago presently. And when she spoke to him then, she mentioned in that public address, I think you all have a copy of it because um, Marcia Weeks had sent me a copy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so she mentioned that when she spoke to him about it, during that time he was very reluctant to speak about it, and he was very reluctant to guide or to give any guidance as regards to it. She even mentioned to him that she wanted to bring in, a whole lot of masks and distribute for the people free of charge and so on and so forth. And he, told her, no, let's not do that. We have to look at the science and what have you. And we know what the science said about those masks and so on and so forth. So even at that time, our present Minister of Health knew fully well the dangers of these injections, the dangers of wearing the mask, and all these nonsense that was taking place at the time. But he, a doctor within the system, depending on the system, controlled by the system, was afraid to say anything regarding it. And uh, the question is why it is you're in government now. You spoke about it then. What are you doing about it now that you're in government? The very same doctor that you spoke with, he is the Minister of Health. What conversations are you both, the both of you, having as a result of these cases that's coming forward now, and so on and so forth? I want to remind the listeners, if they would have probably missed it because I did mention it in numerous times before, that we would have put together a criminal file. We had a meeting with some of the top brass in the police service, and we handed them this file. All right, this file containing evidence, this file containing references, study cases, peer reviews, etc., etc., that was addressing the issue of the jobs at that time and the harmful effects of these jobs. We have indicated in that criminal file countries that would have went that way, started to inoculate their people. How many of these countries we've seen astronomical rise in deaths, and we have the evidence we have provided for them, which was more or less the same, communication or correspondence that we would have sent to the medical board, the Food and Drug Division as well. So we have letters, we have documented letters that we have written to these institutions, informing them and warning them of this, this issue surrounding the injections and so on, and how we advise them that they should not have allowed their population to be inoculated with these injections. All right, because we warned them, we did tell them further down the road, 3 years plus, we're going to see a number of persons dying as a result of taking these injections, and if not, um, you know, dying, but at least they will be facing a lot of medical, circumstances on very mysterious circumstances surrounding the health and so on. We've seen in Trinidad and Tobago a number of cases, a number of police officers, they would have died during the period. All right. We have never seen so much young police officers died in our police service. We have never seen so much of our entertainers, people who are in the entertainment industry, have lost their lives as a result of taking these injections. A lot of them will deny it, but I mean, you could only conclude that this is possibly what it is took place. And as I always try to reason with people, I would, I would use this analogy. You know, for instance, a couple of people going to a restaurant, eating in that restaurant, and they all go home and they get sick after going home. They go to the doctor. An obvious question the doctor is going to ask is, what did you eat? Where did you eat last? What did you have? And they would all say, well, we went to this restaurant, we had this food, and so on and so forth. And it will be a natural concurrence of the doctor that, possibly it could be the food that you eat at the restaurant. Why has not that been the case with the injections? when so many people taking the injections, going to the doctor after, going to the health institutions after, going to the hospitals after, and complaining about not feeling well, complaining about all these different, fatigueness and so on and so forth. And you are saying to these people, it is not the injection. So then what it is? How come all of a sudden people are coming to you, people are dying with cancer, stage 4 cancer, they even get them stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, full blown stage 4. All right?
Wow.
Full
Wow.
blown stage 4. And they're dying, right? Never had cancer before, never had health problems before, never had, stroke issues before, never had clotting before, never had any issues before. People are just dying all of a sudden,
Mm-hmm,
dropping dead
mm-hmm.
all of a sudden. And we're seeing it happening, but nobody is taking the matter to the extent where they're questioning or bringing the state to account for these injuries and these deaths and so on. We have one particular case that we are focusing on presently because that is before the court, and we're hoping that this case may be able to set a precedent. Other people might be able to benefit from it and come forward and get some sort of compensation for the injuries and so on. So we have to see how this is going. Recently, we have also started to look at the immunization program in Trinidad and Tobago, where students are being forced, or parents are being forced to inoculate their children, even though there have been cases of serious side effects after taking these inoculations.
That's right. That's right.
One particular parent has indicated to us that two of her children have gotten the immunized, and one had a very adverse reaction regarding the mobility of his legs, and the other child had an adverse reaction of speech impairment. And the parent is very, very reluctant now to inoculate the child that is supposed to be going to school now. And the school is telling the parent, if you don't do it, he's not going to be able to come to school. All right. So he has to be inoculated. He has to get it. So that parent is willing to come forward, and we have spoken to our attorneys and so on, and we are going to push forward with this particular issue as well. But it all boils down to the same thing: medical intervention that has not been tried and tested in the manner it should have. All right, it's unsafe, and it's been pushed on the population, unsuspecting population, and people are getting adverse reactions. There are studies that is out already, which indicates that children who have not taken these injections or these shots when they were small fare better in life. They live a healthier lives. They're more productive in school, and they're normal children. Okay, children who are taking those injections suffer. A lot of them suffer with ADHD and certain cognitive, you know, um, ailments and so on and so forth, psychologically and what have you and so on. So, these are serious issues, and there are countries um, um, I've looked at, countries such as the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, Austria, and Switzerland, and some of the US states. They have not mandated vaccines as a part of the children being able to access education and so on. In the United Kingdom, vaccines are strongly recommended but not legally required, as in Trinidad and Tobago. It is in our constitution, our law books, where children have to be immunized before they're accepted into the schools. Why should that be a requirement for education? All right, in the Netherlands, no mandatory vaccinations for schools, none. Right? Uptake is high due to public trust, but registrations does not require proof of the child being vaccinated or whatever. In Sweden, childhood vaccines are recommended but not compulsory. Schools do not block unvaccinated children from attending schools. All right. Why can't Trinidad and Tobago? I'm not too sure what's the case in Barbados, but why can't Trinidad and Tobago adopt some of these things? Look at the population of these different countries, the population of the children and the schooling atmosphere, the schooling environment, and so on, and investigate whether or not there is any cases of outbreaks within these schools and so on as a result of these children not taking these injections. In Austria and Switzerland, vaccination is recommended but not enforced for school attendance. Why is that being done in Trinidad and Tobago? Eh? These are first world countries we're talking about. We're classified sometimes as a banana republic, like we want to go down in history as being the worst banana republic that has ever existed. Some of the U.S. states, as we know, the governing body and structure in the United States is very different from ours. So while most states require vaccines for school entry, exemptions exist, all right, for religious purposes, medical purposes, or physiosophical purposes. For example, states like Idaho and Texas allow broad non-medical exemptions. All right. So the thing about it is that um, the there are many countries, and I've labeled some of them, that do not require these things. Why can't we? I mean, what we see happening on a regular basis is countries or smaller countries or developing countries tend to look at the data and look at what is happening in other countries with respect to similar circumstances in those countries, and we take an image out of there, and we try to adopt it in our own country and tweak it as we could to adopt to fit into our system and within our laws, etc., and so on and so forth. And we adopt these policies. Why have not we as yet adopted these policies that is obviously working in other countries? Why are you preventing children from gaining an education in Trinidad and Tobago by forcing them to have these injections, etc., etc.? All right. But coming back to the question of COVID, all right, COVID was a time where they were able to, imply or, push on the population these interventions with impunity to the point where persons who would have died during that period, they all died as a result of COVID. No matter what they went into the hospital for. You could have gotten into an accident. You have fell on and busted your head, died as a result of that. But when you go to the hospital, your death certificate would indicate died as a result of COVID, because they're going to put you through the test that you had COVID, and that's what they're putting on it. Autopsies was never done in Trinidad. All right, they were not doing autopsies, so there was no credible evidence as to say that this person did not die of COVID, this person died of this. There was none. So the state was culpable in that regard, because why would you not want to have an autopsy? The very purpose of an autopsy is to decide whether or not, or to see whether or not how a person would have died. Okay, and in most instances, these autopsies is done to point fingers or to lay blame on someone else, or as the case may be, and so on and so forth. So, we have these things happening with impunity within our countries, and the people, the citizens, are constantly, accepting these things as what can we do? There's nothing that. Of course, you can do something. You can speak out. You can come out in the open and talk about your injury. Talk about what took place when you took these injections. The more you speak about it, is the more people are going to be convinced that something necessary has to be done. There are people who are still living in denial. They are sick as a result of this injection.
Mm-hmm.
I know some of them personally. They're sick as a result of these injections, and they would not admit it that this is because of the injections. They wouldn't They would, all other things, everything else, they would want to blame you know, say that was responsible and so on. But it is obvious when before you took it, you were good. You were well. You were all up and about, and you were healthy, and you were going about your business. There was no fatigue. There was no tiredness. Nothing like that. As you took this injection, you're complaining of tiredness. You can't walk up the stairs, the flight of stairs, because you're panting for breath, and when you go visit the doctor because of these issues, the doctor is telling you you have high blood pressure and you're suffering with this, etc., etc. And lo and behold, one morning, Monday morning, you get up, the doctor is telling you, hey, you have stage 4 cancer.
That's. I mean, Umar, I have heard of Hollywood personnel, Hollywood persons who had no issues, schizophrenia, epilepsy, and other. I can't remember all of the particular medical issues. Had nothing, and shortly after receiving the injections, these aspects developed. There was I remember a testimony I watched of a lady who took the injection, and she is developed a whole psychological, neurological issue that she never had in her life. And I don't know if you have been observing it, but I've been observing that I think it's Robert Kennedy, I call him the Minister of Health in the United States of America, has been pushing back very hard at the whole aspect of the immunization of children. It is not that he doesn't believe in it. He does believe in injections and immunizations and so on, but he believes that these things need to be more thoroughly tested because they're having some very serious side effects and adverse effects with children. I know persons, in terms of the testimonies that are given, who developed autism as a result of it, where the child was suffering from nothing at all prior to the injection, and then suddenly after the injection developed this autistic issue and so on. These are realities, Umar,
Hmm.
but unfortunately, um, the pharmaceutical industry is a multi-trillion-dollar, I call it, industry, has phenomenal um, legal luminaries behind it, billions of dollars at their disposal, and they fight along with governments to resist any liability with regards to this. I don't know if you had heard of it, but I heard that at the beginning of the pandemic, the Brazilian government was approached by Pfizer, and they were required to indemnify Pfizer from any adverse side effects, and to provide the injections for their country, and wanted the Brazilian government to put their national assets at risk in terms of compensatory aspects. I don't know if you had heard about that. I didn't hear
Hmm.
much in terms of the media,
Yeah,
but I did receive
that is correct.
yeah, and I understand it is alleged that certain Caribbean governments were promised. I don't know if it was actually done or not. Notice I say alleged because, as you know, we have to be very careful on the show how we say things. But it was alleged that they were being compensated 17,500 US dollars per injection. That
Well,
the
what we know for sure is that uh, a bond, a COVID bond, was set up in 2017 by the World Bank and some other institutions, and countries were incentivized to report their injuries and deaths and so on as a result of these injections. And the more injuries and deaths they had, they would have gotten more monies. We know for a fact Trinidad had gotten, I think it was about 75 million US dollars. I think it was. That was, we talked about it, it was documented, it was reported as well, in some of our news reports and so on. But, and the other countries would have received the similar incentives as well. It is alleged that doctors were being paid incentives or given incentives for not actually reporting these injury cases, right? Even though they had the system set up where you had to report the injuries, etc., etc. But we did our research, and less than 1% of all the cases were being reported. Less than 1%. All right. So there was a big, governments were very, very much complicit in this crime, which is why we would have presented this criminal record to our law enforcement here. That criminal record is still on the shelves, and they've not done anything with it. All right, we have a copy of it. We had a number of persons signature to that report, and we have, submitted it to the top brass of the police service at the time, and they indicated that they would see to it that this matter was being investigated. And we were calling to account the Prime Minister, the Minister of Health, and the Chief Medical Officer. Now, the thing about it is that you talk about these companies having a wealth of money and power and connections and so on, and with governments, and they have the influence and so on and so forth. But I tell you something, they cannot quiet the noise. There's very little that they can do to quiet the noise. And that is what we have to constantly be doing.
Yes, that's what
We
we
have
need
to
to
make
be
noise.
pushing.
Yeah.
Yes.
In Barbados, I know for a fact there are injured persons who have been affected by these injections. And you all know these persons. Bring them on the program. Let them talk about their experiences. There are one particular doctor I know that would have been very, very opposed to these injections and so on, and would have been, an advocate for, alternative, medicine, etc., etc. If you can get that doctor to come on the program and talk about this, I know, one of the things that he'd be fearful of is he might lose his job, or he might be
Yeah,
affected.
he might lose his license or his
License,
practice
yeah.
because
But we have to be very, very innovative in the way that we talk about this and the way we address it. There's nothing wrong in asking questions and demanding answers, right? Because if I were to come to you, you run this program, and I were to ask you, tell me how many persons that you have invited on this program that would have given a sort of a balanced reporting to a particular issue. All right, and you refuse to give me that information, but it's well known that your program is only inviting people that's talking from your point of view, from your perspective, and pushing your narrative and your agenda, and you're not inviting persons from the other side to talk about, and give a balanced reporter or give a balanced, investigated outlook on particular issue. All right. Now, damn if you do and damn if you don't. Right. And this is what it is we have to do. We have to call to account governments, institutions for what it is they're doing. All right. And there's nothing wrong in asking them a question. I mean, how many persons have come forward and reported injuries to your ministry? In Trinidad and Tobago, there's something called the FYA, if you know Information Act, where we could apply for this information. And we did apply, and we did get the information, and that's why we were able to take some of the cases to court. All right. I don't know how it's set up in Barbados.
I don't believe we have a Freedom of Information Act in Barbados. I don't believe so, and I believe the government is extremely hesitant in order to bring that into being.